What's going on, everyone? It's Sean from Barbell Built Body, and today I'm going over the FASTER study, or more appropriately, critiquing it. So first of all, the FASTER study, if you haven't heard of it, the actual name is Metabolic Characteristics of Keto-Adapted Ultra Endurance Runners. If you type in the FASTER study, it pops right up on Google. For those who haven't read it, and FASTER is just a fancy acronym, which is a marketing ploy, so kudos to the low carb community for coming up with this. But it's fat adapted substrate use in trained elite runners. Now, I want to say, I love this study for what it is because it shows some pretty incredible things of fuel utilization shifts, which is what this study is. It shows fuel utilization shifts. It doesn't show performance, so we'll get into that in a second. But I hate it for what it's become as a marketing tool to advocate for a high-fat, low-carb diet in endurance athletes for performance. So a few things. The study was funded by low-carb companies, Quest and Atkins. And two of the researchers are heavy hitters as far as publishing research in the low-carb realm. And they also have written books that they're getting royalties on that they disclosed at the end of the study. So, which there's nothing wrong with this in general, but you have to know that these studies, while the study itself may be good, if they can get a couple points that are almost catchy or clickbaity, that catch people's attention, they're going to use them. And that's exactly what this study has done. And so we've taken what's shown some fat substrate utilization, or some shifts in substrate utilization during endurance exercise, and marketed it as performance gain. And that's where I think is frustrating. So just to kind of go over the study real quick for those who haven't heard of it, basically had looked at, they had subjects do a VO2 max test and a 3-hour submaximal test. Now, this is not an intervention study. They had 10 low carb athletes, low carb defined as less than 20% of daily energy intake from carbs, and then a group of high carb, 10 high carb athletes, which was over 55% of daily energy intake coming from carbs. And they had to be either top 10% in their competitive field for over 50-kilometer runs, so ultra runs, or compete in Ironmans at least the half Ironman distance. So these were no joke, legit athletes, high level. Now, my beef with the study comes with, so they run a VO2 max test. They see that the low carb group has significantly greater peak oxidation rates, actually 2.3 times higher. Everybody in that 10-person group exhibited higher peak oxidation rates than the highest person in the high carb group. And it also occurred on average at a higher intensity, at 70% of VO2 max versus 55%. Now, this sounds great, but there was zero difference in VO2 max. On top of that, the authors even mentioned at the end that they didn't measure performance. This was not to measure performance. So the issue is that we're having with this study is we're seeing that chronic ultra endurance athletes who have shifted to low carb. So all the people in this study were either low carb for between 9 and 36 months. So that's either 3/4 of a year to up to 3 years. They exhibit some radical shifts in substrate use during exercise. During the submaximal test, obviously, they ran 3 hours at 64% of VO2 max, only water during, then 2 small shakes before. So let me just say, how relevant is that to most athletes? Most people, they're fueling during. This was suboptimal fueling before and after, although it shows impressive fuel utilization shifts. However, there is similar RPE, so rate of perceived exertion between groups, similar glycogen depletion, a handful of other things that I don't really want to get off into the weeds and discuss in this video, because like I said, I want to keep main for the critique of where things have been pulled out of context. And the things that have been pulled out of context are, they're assuming with no performance measures in this, that simply being able to burn or oxidize more fat is leading to performance outcomes that are better than a high carb diet. Now, the problem is this was not an intervention study, right? It was a cross-sectional. So they're just taking people that have been on this diet and people that have been on this diet and comparing what their substrate utilization is. Now, what drives me nuts is that that higher fat oxidation comes out in a marketing tool, and now the low carb community goes, oh, you burn twice as much fat at lower intensity, and oh, you know, if you can't go 3 hours without exercise and without eating, you know, you're metabolically impaired or all this stuff. This is the issue. This study was a fantastic study, extremely insightful, and shows how adaptable the human body is and metabolism is at utilizing different substrates when you chronically change the fuel that the body uses. But you can't come extrapolating and saying low carb is better for performance, especially from this study. And in fact, there's another study that was looked at, especially even in endurance athletes, where or ultra endurance athletes, where the exercise intensity is really low, where they switched to keto for a while and it didn't work, and then they ended up coming back, and this was a top 3 contender at Ironman Kona. No joke, legit athlete. Basically started bombing out of meats, going keto, did it for a number of months, and then switched back to vegetarian diet, high carb, and then went back to his good old performance self. So you need to be very careful for anyone who's trying to sell this. Like I said, this is a great marketing ploy, but you have to be aware of all these things when you're reading the study of what is the study actually saying. And this study is not a performance study. So I hope this is helpful. If you have questions and want to get into the nitty-gritty and discuss the study more, I highly recommend reading it. And if you want to talk about it, you have differing opinion with me, you want to get into it, I have no problem either having a casual discussion or straight up debating you for anybody who thinks that this study does anything different from what I just said of show fuel utilization shifts. I hope that's helpful. I'll talk to you guys soon.